And so what happens, he says, and this is where the book really took on new meaning for me, is that churches, and so that's his concern, churches begin to wither and die, he says. And he says what threatens churches today, he says it's the loss of a God who is God, not the loss of relevance. And so what do we hear today for churches in decline? We need better this. We need better coffee. We need to change the name. Stop wearing robes, don't sing hymns, get rid of the marimba, get rid of the piano, get guitars and drums, and we just need to jazz things up, and then people will come rushing back to the church. He's saying it's not relevance, it's not even lack of resources that is threatening the church. What's threatening the church is that the church has lost its sense of God. What do you think about that? It's the loss of a God who is God. It's the loss of the reality of God's presence in our lives. Because he says we're so assaulted by this material world in which we live. It's only what we can see and only what we can touch and only what we can manipulate that gives us this sense of a finite being living before an infinite God. This idea of humbling ourselves and saying we're weak but you are strong. Jesus, help me. Jesus, walk with me. That is out the door these days because it's all about agency. You've got to do something. Don't sit around praying, waiting on God to do something. And he says that's what the material world teaches us. And so prayer becomes an afterthought. I don't subscribe to sitting around and just saying, oh, I'm extending thoughts and prayers. Don't get me wrong. But I believe that the mistake we're making is we have relegated prayer in the church to a place where we use it to, let's pray before we eat the meal. Let's pray before we start the meeting. Let's pray when we end the meeting. It's sort of this window dressing that prayer has become in many, many congregations, and that's the reason why the church is in crisis. The church doesn't believe in a God who is God. It's hard to pray if you're not there. It's hard to pray if you don't believe that God is with you. God was present when James's neck was being taken off. God was with Peter, and that's the mystery of prayer, isn't it? Because you say, well, why would God save Peter, and then why would God just sit passively by and watch James die? I mean, he's got a mother, he's got a brother. What's going on here, God? And therefore, it doesn't make sense to pray. Well, no, that's not true. God exists. God is active. God is present. God is working in the world. And how do we know that? Look at Jesus. You see, yes, this invisible God who seems out of touch, out of reach, and that's why God comes in the person of Jesus so we can touch him, we can see him, we can know him. He puts on flesh. This church in Antioch, thankfully, had no such intellectual barriers. And that's why I want you to read the book of Acts again and just read it with the eye. Notice how many times they pray. And you'll notice that they prayed in times of turbulence and tragedy. They prayed in times of pain. They prayed because it's just what we do to worship God. They prayed to release leaders into ministry. They just prayed and they prayed and they prayed. And it wasn't just when there was a crisis. Prayer was their lifestyle. And you go back to Acts chapter 2, and it tells us that these people were devoted to 4 specific things: the apostles' teaching, breaking of bread, prayer. It says they were devoted to prayer, and they were devoted to fellowship. These people knew how to pray. Sometimes I wonder, and I know you've asked the question, why is it that the center of Christianity, which was once in Europe and North America, has now shifted? The center of Christianity, the average Christian that you see in the world today is no longer white, blonde, blue-eyed. The average Christian that you will meet out of the billions and billions of Christians in the world will most likely be a dark-skinned person, a woman living in somewhere in the global south. That's where Christianity is today. You say, well, why is that so? Why has the hand of the Lord now fallen on those places in the world? I think it's because those people don't have the struggle that we have. They haven't lost the sense that God is God. They haven't. And I've seen it in Jamaica, and I had the privilege of going to Egypt, and I saw it. Because in these places, friends, listen to me, in these places, the prayer meeting, now hear me on this, the prayer meeting is larger than the public Sunday worship. And when the prayer meeting exceeds the Sunday gathering, things are going to explode. God's going to show up. Amazing things will happen. Those who have studied revivals tell us that there has never, ever been a great revival. And I've read a few of those books before. There's never, ever been a great revival that has not been preceded by strong, fervent, perhaps 2 or 3 people getting together and just saying, let's just pray. Let's pray that God will visit our area. Let's pray that God would send showers of blessing in our time. And over time, these groups tend to grow. Hearts are being united. The hand of the Lord falls. And often, it then becomes this infection. Because I see that the Spirit of Jesus is here helping us to become a praying community. I see in small groups, and people in their groups are praying. I see our mission prayer group, almost like you could just clock them once a month on a Wednesday, like a metronome. Once a month on a Wednesday, they gather, they pray. Our bi-weekly prayer gathering, our Saturday morning men's fellowship, our women's fellowship. This church is increasingly becoming a praying community. And the reason why I'm mentioning that, because what I hear people telling me all the time is, I don't know how to pray. You know, the way to pray is to pray. The way to pray is to get with other Christians and just, even if you don't have a word to say, sit among other praying Christians and just hear them pray and learn how to pray. So I want to put that back on you. We want to become a praying community, and we want you to join us and be part of that. So, brothers and sisters, don't grow weary in this holy endeavor. God is most glorified when we say, Lord, I'm weak, but you are strong. That's when we're saying God is God. God is most glorified. A few weeks ago when I was on study leave, I also read another helpful little book called The Mark of a Movement, The Marks of a Movement. What are the marks of a movement? There are 10 of them, and one of them is prayer. And at the end of this book that I was reading, the writer ends the book with a prayer. And I read it, and it touched my heart.